The chair now recognizes Mr. Mann for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here today, Secretary Buttigieg. I'm Congressman Tracy Mann, and I represent the Big First District of Kansas. Mr. Secretary, the Department of Transportation has failed repeatedly to comply with congressionally set deadlines. One of these delayed decision makings has a significant impact on communities in Kansas like Hayes, Dodge City, Garden City, Liberal, and Salina, as well as several rural communities across America. SkyWest Airlines is still awaiting a decision regarding its decision or its plan to create SkyWest Charter to operate flights in small communities. Mr. Secretary, what's the timeline for a decision from the Department of Transportation, and would you commit to that timeline in writing in the next 2 weeks?
So I can tell you that that's under active consideration. I can't comment on the merits of the application because it's being reviewed right now. I recognize the importance of that application. It entails both economic and safety authorities that have to be considered, and it requires a very thorough and conservative look. So I'm not in a position today to make news about the date of a disposition of that, but I can tell you that it's under active consideration.
Understood, but just understand we need a decision for those communities that don't have air service right now, or have air service that's being jeopardized. And I understand you can't commit or talk about the merits of it, but would like to see a commitment of some sort in a general time frame on when we might get a decision, because this delay is really hurting our rural communities, which are often disadvantaged, as was mentioned earlier. So, second question, Mr. Secretary, I've heard that the time to resolve NEPA and historic preservation concerns has increased over the last couple of years. The length of time for approval seems to depend on the lead staff member assigned to review the project and not the law. Mr. Secretary, what are you doing to ensure that this process is speedy, unbiased, and uniform across the department?
We want to get projects done, and an important part of getting projects done quickly is to move promptly through the NEPA process. I would want to spend a little more time understanding some of the data you're referring to, because we believe we've been able to mark a downward trend in terms of the number of years to complete an EIS in recent years, but I recognize there are many different ways to slice the same data, and the point is just to get it done. Yeah. I should note that about 95% of our projects are categorical exclusions, so they don't even have to go through an EIS or an EA. And part of what we're working to do is connect our categorical exclusion authorities to other departments when they exist, just to create a smoother path to get through there. I also embrace the spirit of the concept of the shot clock, trying to make sure that we set ourselves a goal, often 2 years, and that's at the outer limit. It doesn't mean you want it to take 2 years. It means the biggest, most complicated projects, you understand it might take that. Sometimes part of what adds to a NEPA timeline is the readiness of the project sponsor. In other words, the state, the transit authority, the airport. But we don't want to treat that as an excuse that says that just because we're waiting for them to prepare something, we have no responsibility to help them get it done. And so what we want to do, in addition to having easy to understand, transparent, and simple processes, is to take a little bit of responsibility for guiding project sponsors, especially rural communities, maybe haven't done an NEPA before, through the process. That's where the technical assistance and some of the other handshake, I would describe it as handshake programming that we have, could come into play, as well as the formal regulatory updates.
Great, I appreciate that. And in that same vein, what are you doing to ensure that the department is complying with the streamlining provisions that were included in the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which we signed this summer? You know, all this is getting at the intent, which is to speed up these permitting processes, which in fact, would reduce cost in these projects. And I think folks, in Congress, generally speaking, whether they voted for or against the transportation bill, let's make sure that we at least get as much lead on the target as we can to build infrastructure in this country. The NEPA permit seems to pull from that needlessly many, many times.
Thanks. Yeah, I hear that loud and clear. And actually, just today, the Federal Register will show one of the first cases in which a department was able to do a joint categorical exclusion created by that Fiscal Responsibility Act. It's an area where we do a CE jointly with the Department of Energy. And I think we can do more where that came from. I really do. We're not out to short any important procedural or policy or legal requirements, but we don't want anything to take longer than it ought to.
I agree wholeheartedly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, I yield back. And thank you again, Mr. Secretary, for being here today.